The door clicked shut before I could even breathe her name. No warning, no hesitation, just the smooth, final sound of wood meeting metal, like the end of a conversation that had already been decided long ago. I stood there for a few seconds, frozen on the porch, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of vanilla and roses. Inside was the birthday cake I ordered from her favorite bakery, the one downtown that took me 40 minutes to reach because she always said they made frosting the proper way, not too sweet. The candles inside were pink, her color, the same shade as the lipstick she never left the house without. I smiled weakly and knocked again. "Mom," I said, my voice half swallowed by the wind. Nothing. Through the frosted glass, I saw shadows move, tall shapes, laughter, a hand waving past the light. Then I heard it, her voice, soft but firm. "Not today, Aubrielle." At first I thought she was joking. That old half-teasing tone she used whenever she wanted to make a point. But this time there was no warmth, no chuckle after the pause, only silence thick enough to hear the clinking of glasses from inside. I swallowed. "Mom, it's your birthday," I said, forcing a smile even though she couldn't see me. "I just came to drop this off." The doorknob rattled slightly, but it didn't turn. Her voice came again, lower this time, almost pleading. "Please, not today, Alara's here, it's complicated." Alara, my half-sister. The word itself felt like the reason I'd been standing outside my own mother's house. I shifted the bag to my other hand, trying not to let the anger reach my face. "I'm not here to fight," I said quietly. "I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday." On the other side of the door, there was a whisper, Alara's voice, muffled but clear. "If she comes in, I'm leaving." A silence followed. Then the lock clicked again, this time sharper, final. I stared at the door. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe more. The afternoon air felt too heavy for April, too warm for the moment. A balloon floated past the window, pink and gold, brushing the curtains like a small ghost. Inside, someone laughed. It was the kind of laugh that belonged to people who had nothing to worry about, light, careless, free. And somehow, it hurt more than shouting would have. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. 3 hours on the road, a day off work. A $200 gift bag filled with things I thought might make her smile, a silk scarf, a candle that smelled like sea salt and jasmine, a framed photo of the three of us from years ago. For a second, I almost knocked again. Habit maybe, or hope, but my hand froze midair. I knew she wouldn't open it. Not today, not when Alara was there. Something in me, quiet but steady, began to move. I pulled out my phone and unlocked the banking app. Electricity, water, internet, phone plan, all listed neatly under Figueroa household. 3 years of quiet payments, all labeled as auto. My thumb hovered over the cancel button. I hesitated, not because I doubted what I was doing, but because part of me still wanted her to open that door and say, "Come in, honey." But she didn't. The sound of laughter inside grew louder, filling the air like static, so I pressed it. Cancel. Confirm. Done, a pop-up appeared. Electricity service will terminate within 24 hours. I didn't feel guilty, I just felt empty. Then from inside, I heard Alara's voice again. "Why did the Wi-Fi drop?" she shouted. "I'm in the middle of a call," I almost smiled. Not out of spite, but out of something deeper, relief maybe. The kind you feel when the mask finally falls and no one can pretend anymore. I stepped back, setting the cake gently on the welcome mat. The tag on the ribbon fluttered in the wind. "Happy 60th, Mom." I had spent so long planning this visit, rehearsing what I'd say, picturing her surprise. Now the only thing that felt real was the chill running up my arms. Behind the closed door, I heard her voice, rising in panic. "What's going on with the power?" Another voice, male, probably her husband, muttered something about checking the fuse. I turned and walked down the steps. Each one sounded louder than it should have, echoing off the driveway. My car was parked across the street, half in shade, half in sunlight. I slid inside and sat for a moment, staring at the house that used to be mine too. I thought about all the times I'd driven here before, with groceries, with bills paid, with gifts I couldn't afford. Every visit had ended the same way, with me leaving quietly, hoping that next time would be different. But this time it was. I started the engine. The house stayed perfectly still, curtains drawn, laughter muffled behind glass. No one came after me. No one called my name. As I pulled onto the street, my phone buzzed, a message from Mom. "Please don't make a scene." That was it. 4 words. No sorry, no thank you, just a warning, as if I was the problem. I stared at the text for a moment, then turned off the screen. I'd spent years being careful not to make a scene, smiling when I wanted to scream. Paying bills to earn affection that never came. Not anymore. The road ahead shimmered in the heat. I rolled down the window, letting the dry wind whip through my hair. The air smelled like dust and sunburned grass, but it was clean, it was mine. For a long time, I drove without music, just the sound of tires on asphalt and the soft hum of an engine that had taken me through every version of my life. When I reached the highway, I whispered something I hadn't said out loud in years. "Happy birthday, Mom." The words didn't hurt this time. They floated out the window like smoke, fading into the horizon. And in that moment, I realized something simple, something sharp. The door hadn't really closed on me. It had never been open in the first place. The highway opened like a ribbon of heat, and I let the car carry me without a plan. Signs blurred past. A billboard for a storage company. A church message about forgiveness. A real estate face smiling at no one in particular. I kept my hands steady at 10 and 2 and tried to let the wind do the talking. It rushed through the open window and pressed against my skin until the last of the porch chill lifted. At the first exit, I pulled off for gas. The station lights flickered in the afternoon glare. I parked by a pump and sat there a moment with the engine off and the radio quiet, listening to the hush you only hear when everything stops at once. The glass door of the shop opened and closed on a chime that sounded tired. A boy with a name tag stocked a cooler with bottled water. Somewhere behind the building, a dog barked and then gave up. I took out my phone and woke the screen. The banking app bloomed into numbers and dates, a timeline of my obedience. Electricity, 63 payments. Water, 63. Internet, 36 at the new rate because Alara said she needed it for work. Family phone plan, a neat little column that began the same month my mother said it would be nice to be connected. Beneath that, a stack of streaming subscriptions I barely used. Names that had once felt like small gifts. Names that looked like receipts for silence. The total for the last 3 years sat at the bottom, smug and round. I let the number rest in my eyes until it stopped feeling like a wave that might pull me under. It was not a wave. It was a map. It showed exactly where I had been walking in circles. A tap on the passenger window startled me. An older woman with a straw hat had paused beside the car. She pointed at the cupcakes on the seat and smiled with her whole face. I lowered the window. "For a birthday?" she asked. "Yes," I said, sort of. "They look pretty," she said. "Someone is lucky." I almost said the truth. Instead, I said, "Thank you," and handed her the box. My voice surprised me. It was steady, almost gentle. She hesitated, then took it like I had given her something precious. Maybe I had. She wished me a good day and walked back to her truck. I watched her lift the lid with a small gasp of delight. The sound was soft and clean. It washed the bitterness out of my mouth. I filled the tank, paid in cash, and drove on. Austin folded around me in low warehouses and long streets that held the heat even when clouds moved in. I turned toward the lake without thinking, the way a bird finds its way back to a tree it knew as a chick. By the time I reached the water, the sun had shifted, and the sky carried that color that is not yet evening and no longer afternoon. I parked in a gravel lot and kicked off my shoes. The shore was a rough lace of rock and weed. I walked until the ground gave way to a strip of sand left by last week's rain, then sat and pressed my palms into it. Grains clung to my skin. The lake smelled like old metal and green things. A boat engine coughed somewhere far off, then calmed to a long hum. I closed my eyes and tried to let the scene print itself inside me. Light, water, wind on bare ankles. It felt like making a copy of myself that was not colored by anyone else. My phone buzzed once from the bag beside me. I did not look. Then it buzzed again. I counted to 10 and still did not look. When it buzzed a third time, I pulled it out and checked the screen. 3 messages from Mom, all short. "We need to talk. Please answer. Do not do anything dramatic." I stared at the words until they faded from meaning and became only shapes. I scrolled up. There was the earlier one. "Please do not make a scene." All of them different ways of saying I should stay small, stay useful, stay quiet. I turned the phone over so the screen faced the sand and let the battery warm the case against my palm. All around me, the afternoon drifted toward evening. A child nearby tried to skip a stone, and the first one flopped like a small fish. Then he tried again and again until the 4th stone ran across the surface in quick little steps. He shouted and looked back at a man who might have been his father. The man smiled without moving his mouth. I breathed in and out and tried to measure the size of my life without the house, without the lists. Without the old script where being good meant solving problems I did not make. The answer that came back was not a sentence but a feeling, more space, more air, a sound like a door in my chest that had been stuck for years and was now moving on its hinges. I thought of the first time Alara came to live with us. I was 18 and away at school when I got the call from Mom. She said it would be wonderful to have another girl in the house, that I could be an example. I arrived home to a new room made up for her and my boxes stacked in the garage. It was not cruel exactly. It was tidy. That was her style. She did not push. She arranged. She made her choices look like the weather. Sometimes I think that is how I learned to disappear, not with a fight but with neatness. A gull circled low and then rose again on a pocket of warm air. I followed it with my eyes until my neck ached. When I looked back down, the water was silver where the light touched it and dark where it did not. The world can be two things at once. I knew that. I just forgot it when I tried so hard to be only one thing for her. A couple sat on a blanket near the path. The woman had a book open, but she was not reading. Her head leaned against the shoulder of the man. He pointed at nothing, and she nodded as if the nothing were a story. I used to think I had to buy love the way you buy a subscription. Pay on time and do not complain, and the service will continue. But love is not a service. Love is a place where you are allowed in without knocking. My phone buzzed again with a new message. This time it was from an unknown number. It read, "Alara here. You are selfish. You embarrassed mom." I typed 3 different replies and deleted each one before I could send it. The wind took a cooler turn and brushed the hair off my forehead. In the end, I wrote nothing. Silence can be a sentence too. I switched the phone to airplane mode and set it face down again. The old habit tried to rise, that urgent rush to fix, to explain, to soften my edges so other people would not cut themselves on me. I let the habit tire itself out like a child throwing a tantrum in an empty room. When the sky began to bruise with evening, I stood and brushed the sand from my hands. I walked to the waterline and let a small wave lick my toes. The cold made me gasp. It felt like a signature. Not dramatic, not brave, just mine. I thought of the porch, the pink balloons, the ribbon tag that said Happy 60th. I thought of the word awkward. I thought of the lock turning like a final grade. I do not know how long I stood there. Long enough for the first star to appear. Long enough for the smell of sunscreen to fade and the smell of wet rock to take over. Long enough for my breath to slow until the inside of my chest matched the pace of the lake. Back at the car, I opened the trunk and found the small notebook I keep for lists and little prayers I do not call prayers. On the first blank page, I wrote 3 lines. I will not pay to be loved. I will not apologize for being a door that does not open to harm. I will choose quiet even if it looks like leaving. The words sat there, plain and square. They did not glow. They did not promise anything. They were enough. I started the engine and let the headlights paint a path across the lot. The radio came on by itself and found a station where a woman was singing with a voice like smoke over stones. I let her sing. The road out of the park felt old and new at the same time, like a song I used to know in a language I was finally learning again. At the first light, I turned off the music, and then I turned off the phone. The screen went dark and stayed dark in my hand. The quiet filled the car and did not scare me. It spread into the seat and the mirror and the little space in front of the glove box, and then it spread into me until I felt like I was the one lighting the dash with a soft calm from somewhere behind my ribs. The door had closed. The house had kept its party. The messages had stacked up like small demands I no longer intended to meet. None of that changed the sky, or the lake, or the taste of air after a day of heat. None of it changed the simple truth that waited all afternoon for me to notice it. I was driving away, yes, but I was also arriving. Where I could not say yet, only that the place had room for me. Only that, for the first time in a long while, I did not feel like a guest in my own life. I drove until the city folded into open space. The hills outside Austin looked washed and dry, pale gold under the last light. I wasn't going anywhere in particular. I only knew I had to keep moving, because stopping felt too much like remembering. When the first song on the radio ended, I turned the volume down and let the silence sit with me. The quiet wasn't empty. It had a pulse, a soft hum that made me aware of my own breathing. Every inhale felt like a question I hadn't answered in years. A rest stop appeared on the side of the highway, the kind with vending machines and tired families stretching their legs. I parked under a flickering street lamp and killed the engine. The air was still hot, thick with dust and gasoline. For a long moment I just sat there, both hands on the wheel, watching my reflection fade in the glass. 3 years, that was how long I'd been paying for that house. It had started with a single call from Mom. She'd sounded smaller that day, her voice wrapped in worry. "Sweetheart, your stepfather lost his job. Construction's slow, and the bills are stacking up. We just need help for a few." I didn't hesitate. I had just landed my first full-time job at a firm downtown, the kind of job that made you feel like a real adult. I said yes without thinking. I even felt proud, like I was doing what a good daughter should. The first transfer was $300, then $600, then full payments for the utilities, the internet, and eventually the car insurance. Just until he gets back on his feet, she'd said, but he never did. The months blurred, the bills multiplied, and I kept telling myself this was temporary. One night, I checked my credit card statement and saw a new line I didn't recognize: Serenity Spa, $480. I thought it was a mistake until I remembered the way Mom had smiled that morning over the phone. "You know, my back been killing me. Ilara said massages help." That's when I realized I had become the invisible line between their comfort and their consequences. I opened my glove compartment and pulled out a crumpled receipt. It was from last Christmas, a delivery order to their house for smoked ham, sides, and wine. I'd been too tired to drive up that day, so I sent dinner instead. Ilara had posted a photo of the meal on social media. Her caption read, "Family feast, all love, no drama." She hadn't tagged me. I leaned back against the seat and laughed quietly. Not bitter, not hysterical, just a sound of disbelief that felt like breaking glass inside my throat. My phone screen lit up, reflecting in the window. An old notification from a budgeting app blinked. Your spending exceeded your limit in the family category. I hadn't opened that app in months, maybe years. The screen turned black again, and my reflection stared back at me, tired eyes, faint traces of lipstick, hair pulled into a messy knot. I tried to remember when I'd last bought something for myself that wasn't on sale or marked practical. I couldn't. A car door slammed nearby. A couple laughed as they walked to the vending machines, sharing a soda. Their laughter carried through the heavy air and made me ache in a way I didn't expect. I started the engine again. The dashboard light blinked softly. The air conditioning kicked in, whispering through the vents. For a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to drive and never stop, to keep going until I forgot the exact number of miles between who I used to be and whoever I might become. The gas needle was low, so I pulled into the next station. Inside the store, the cool air wrapped around me like something I didn't deserve. I bought a bottle of water and stood at the counter. The cashier, a young guy with headphones around his neck, smiled politely. "You look like you've had a day," he said. "Something like that," I replied. He didn't ask more, just nodded and handed me my change. Simple kindness. No conditions. It almost made me cry. Back in the car, I drank the water too fast, the cold hitting my stomach like a reminder that I was still alive. The city lights were gone now. The road ahead was a thin silver ribbon under the stars. As I drove, I started whispering things out loud just to hear them in real air. "I'm not angry. I'm tired. I'm allowed to stop." Each sentence felt like a pebble thrown into a lake, small, but it rippled. The road signs counted down toward Austin again, but I didn't want to go home yet. I wasn't ready to face the apartment that still smelled faintly of their perfume whenever I opened the closet. Instead, I pulled over at a small lookout point overlooking the water reservoir. The wind here was softer, carrying the smell of cedar and salt. I stepped out, letting it hit my face. The moon was half full. The reflection on the water looked like a coin dropped and forgotten. I took out my phone again and opened the gallery. Photos scrolled past birthdays, dinners, family vacations where I was always the one behind the camera. In every picture, Ilara's smile looked brighter. My mother's hand rested on her shoulder, not mine. I zoomed in on one photo from 2 years ago, the 4 of us at Christmas. My arm had been cropped out when Mom printed it for the frame. I remember because I noticed the corner of my red sleeve still visible, like a secret only I could see. I deleted it. One by one, I deleted the rest. It didn't feel like erasing. It felt like making space. The wind picked up, fluttering my shirt, whispering something low I couldn't quite catch. For the first time all day, I realized I was hungry. I hadn't eaten since morning. I found a granola bar in my bag, half crushed, and laughed quietly as I ate it. It tasted like cardboard and freedom. When I finished, I turned off my phone again and watched the stars. They looked indifferent, patient, ancient, the opposite of everything I'd been raised to believe love should be. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. The night had grown quiet by the time I reached the city again. Austin shimmered at the edges, a blur of light and noise that didn't seem to belong to me anymore. My hands rested loosely on the steering wheel, fingers tracing invisible patterns as I replayed the years that had brought me here. Each memory felt like a tiny spark, harmless on its own but dangerous in a crowd. The first time I ever heard my family talk about me as if I wasn't in the room was 3 weeks before that birthday. I had gone home unannounced on a Friday evening. The house was lit up, laughter spilling through the windows. I carried grocery bags filled with the things Mom liked: organic milk, fresh basil, a baguette still warm from the bakery near my apartment. I thought it would be a nice surprise. When I reached the porch, I paused, hearing voices from inside. They were sitting in the kitchen, their laughter bright and sharp. "She takes everything too seriously," Alara said. "Like she's allergic to fun." "She's always been wound tight," Mom answered, her voice soft but approving. "That's just how she is." I froze, my hand on the door handle. My stepfather chuckled. "Probably goes a whole week without talking to anyone. People like that break eventually." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't move. The sound of forks against plates, a chair scraping, then Mom again. "Well, at least she's useful. If not, we'd have lost the power months ago." They laughed, all of them. "At least she's useful." The words sank like lead. I let go of the door handle. The grocery bag slipped from my hand and hit the porch with a dull thud. Apples rolled across the wood, one bouncing off the step and landing on the dirt below. No one inside heard it. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving everything behind: the groceries, the warmth, the version of myself that still believed in unconditional love. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my apartment with every light on, the room glowing too bright to think. I opened my laptop and logged into the credit account I'd given Mom for emergencies. Line after line of purchases stared back at me: a new MacBook Pro, a 4-day retreat in Sedona, a spa package, a plane ticket to Palm Springs. My throat tightened. I checked the dates, each one matched with a weekend Alara had posted photos online. A caption on one of them read, "Healing takes investment." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. Then I called Mom. She answered on the first ring like she'd been expecting it. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice sweet and careful. "Did you buy a MacBook?" I asked. There was a pause. "That's for Alara. She needs it for remote work." "And the retreat?" Another pause. "That's to help her mental health. You know she's been struggling." "With my money," I said. She sighed as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Aubrielle, you make more than all of us combined. It's not a big deal. You'll understand when you have kids." I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. For a while, I just sat there, the silence of my apartment pressing in from all sides. Then I got up, took the credit card from my wallet, and cut it in half with the kitchen scissors. The plastic cracked under the blades, a clean sound that somehow felt like revenge and mourning at the same time. But the cut inside me didn't heal. The next evening, around 6, there was pounding on my door, fast, angry, relentless. I set down my teacup and looked through the peephole. Mom, my stepfather, Alara, all three of them crowded in the narrow hallway like a storm that had found a body to strike. I didn't open it at first. I let them knock again. Alara's voice pierced through the wood. "Open up, or are you seriously going to let your family lose their minds without Wi-Fi?" I took a slow breath and turned the knob. Alara stumbled forward a little, surprised. Mom pushed past her, eyes wet, voice trembling. "Aubrielle, you're being ridiculous. We're living like it's the Stone Age." My stepfather grumbled behind her, his face red. "It's not that big a deal, but you're making it one." I raised an eyebrow. 3 years of bills isn't a big deal?" Alara threw her hands up. "Oh my God, are you keeping score now?" "I didn't," I said calmly. "The bank did." I pulled out my phone and opened the app. The list of transactions glowed in the dim hallway light. "Electricity, water, internet, groceries, retreats. You never asked, you just took." Mom's lip trembled. "We trusted you." "No," I said. "You depended on me because it was easier than being honest." Alara crossed her arms. "You sound like a therapist meme." I looked at her, really looked, the perfectly ironed shirt, the pearl earrings I'd bought her last Christmas, the confidence of someone who never had to clean up her own mess. "Maybe I should start sounding like myself for once." She rolled her eyes. "So what now? You want us to beg? You think you're better than us because you pay bills?" I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "I think I'm finally done pretending we're a family." Mom gasped like I'd slapped her. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "Family isn't something you can switch on and off." "Self-respect is," I said, and I just turned it on. For a moment, no one spoke. The hallway felt small, heavy with years of unspoken resentment. Then Alara muttered something under her breath, something that sounded like insurance. I caught it just barely, the way you hear a match strike before you see the flame. Mom shushed her quickly, eyes wide. "Alara, stop." My stepfather cleared his throat, glaring. "That's enough." But the word stuck in my mind. Insurance. I didn't understand it then, but it scratched at something buried deep, a word that didn't belong to this fight yet somehow did. They left soon after, slamming the door behind them. When the echo faded, I realized my tea had gone cold. I carried the cup to the sink, poured it out, and watched the water swirl down the drain. My reflection in the window above the sink looked unfamiliar, not broken, not angry, just awake. That was the night the quiet inside me became something else. Not peace exactly, but clarity. A quiet explosion that didn't make sound or fire, only space. Space where love had been replaced by obligation. Space that finally belonged to me. I sat down on the floor, back against the counter, and whispered to the empty room, "No more." The silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was the sound of the house remembering how to breathe. The week after the hallway confrontation moved in crooked lines. Time did not pass the way clocks say it should. It stalled in the afternoons and rushed in the evenings, and then slipped through the cracks at night when the apartment grew quiet enough to hear the hum inside the walls. I kept doing the small, ordinary things that keep a person from floating away. I washed dishes. I took out the trash. I changed the sheets and tucked the corners tight the way I learned when I was a kid and wanted my bed to look like a hotel. Every hour or so, I would catch myself standing still with a dish in one hand, looking at nothing, replaying a single word. Insurance. It had dropped out of Alara's mouth like a coin she thought no one would hear hit the floor. My mother had shushed her too fast. My stepfather had cleared his throat like a warning bell. I told myself it was nothing and then told myself I was lying. On Wednesday, I left work early and drove the long way home. I did not want to be inside yet. I passed the farmer's market that sets up under the overpass and watched a girl toss peaches from one palm to the other as if they were coins from a fountain. I parked and walked through the stalls without buying anything. The air smelled like basil and warm plastic and the first hot rain. A musician played a slow song on a guitar with 4 strings and a crack down the face. He sang as if the words belonged to him, and then to me, and then to both of us. I went home with an empty bag and sat at the kitchen table. I opened my notebook to the page where I had written my 3 lines by the lake. I read them out loud. I was surprised to hear my voice sound steady. Then I turned to a fresh page and wrote one more line. I wrote the word that would not stop following me: insurance. It looked strange alone on the paper. It needed a shape. I tried giving it one: home insurance, health insurance, life insurance. The last one made the back of my neck go cold. I closed the notebook and put it on the counter as if it were something alive. That night, I dreamed of locked drawers and keys that looked like teeth. I woke before dawn feeling like I had been running without moving. I made coffee and sat on the floor with my back against the cabinets. The cup was too hot to hold, and the steam fogged my glasses. I did not turn on the lights. The kitchen stayed blue with morning. When I finally picked up my phone, there was a new message from a cousin I had not spoken to in over a year. Kelly, married to Ben quiet at family gatherings, eyes that noticed everything. The message was short. I saw what happened on your mother's birthday. You were brave. If you need anything, I can talk. I stared at the words and felt the odd, weightless feeling of being seen by someone who was not supposed to be watching. I wrote back, "Thank you, I am fine. I might have questions." She replied a few minutes later, "I am here." I did not ask my questions yet. I did not even know how to form them. Instead, I cleaned the apartment until the floor shone and there was nothing left to wipe. Then I took a long shower and stood in the warm spray until my fingers pruned and the mirror fogged. I traced the word in the steam and then rubbed it away. That afternoon, I decided to drive past the house. I told myself I was not going in. I told myself I only wanted to see the front yard that I used to mow when I was 16, the one with the stubborn patch that never stayed green. The sun had already swung low when I turned onto their street. Cars lined both sides. A delivery van idled with its hazards on. Someone was hosting something again. I parked at the corner and walked the rest of the way. From a distance, the house looked like a picture in a magazine. Fresh mulch. A wreath for spring. A new bench by the porch with a cushion that matched the shutters. The lights inside were soft and warm. I could hear the clink of glasses and the murmur of many voices. I stood under the oak tree 2 houses down and told myself to leave. I did not. I moved closer, the way a diver steps to the edge of the board and stands there to feel how far it is. The side gate was open. That was new. My mother kept it locked when I was young. Tonight it hung ajar like a mouth that had finished a sentence and was waiting for applause. I stepped through and followed the flagstone path that curved along the wall toward the small window above the kitchen sink. The smell of garlic and lemon drifted up. Someone laughed. Someone else said hush. I did not plan to listen. I only wanted to stand for a minute in the yard that had been mine too. But when voices grew clear, I held my breath and stayed very still. Alara again. You should have seen her face when I said insurance. I thought she would faint. My stepfather's voice came low. We agreed not to bring that up. I pressed my palm flat against the rough stucco. The wall was cool. Elara scoffed. What does it matter? She cut the money anyway. Then my mother, in that careful tone she used when she wanted to look kind while doing something that was not. Do not be cruel. She has always tried her best. The kitchen fell quiet for a beat. I could hear the scrape of silverware, the tap of a glass set down. Elara again, softer now, almost curious. Do you think she knows Dad changed the policy after he got sick? My mouth went dry. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears like someone knocking from inside a door. My stepfather cleared his throat. Enough. But Elara went on, not mean, just absent-minded in that way she had when she forgot other people were listening. She said the agent called last month. Something about confirmation of beneficiaries. I almost answered her phone, but Mom grabbed it first. There was the sound of a drawer closing. My mother's voice came back clipped. Drop it. The silence that followed was longer. The kind that sits heavy and looks around to see who will break first. When it broke, it was with the sound of a chair moving back from the table and the rustle of napkins and the television in the next room being turned up a notch, like a hand trying to smooth a wrinkle. I stepped away from the window. My legs felt hollow, as if someone had taken the bones out and left the shape standing. I moved back along the path, through the gate, down the sidewalk to the street where the van was still idling. The driver stared at his phone. I was invisible to him, a woman walking away from a pretty house at the good end of the day. In the car, my hands shook. I put them on my knees to stop it. A neighbor came out to water a line of herbs in a planter. The hose made a soft hiss and the water hit the dirt with a smell like the first 5 minutes of rain. I watched the small dark circles spread and then fade at the edges. I did not cry. I did not speak. I turned the key and drove the 2 miles to a small strip mall where the lights were always too bright and the parking lot always half empty. I pulled in, turned the engine off, and sat with the windows up until the air went stale. Then I rolled them down and let the heat and the smell of old oil on concrete seep in. When I could breathe again, I opened my notebook on the passenger seat and wrote down everything I had heard. I wrote the exact words and the pauses and the way my mother said, "Do not be cruel," and the way she said, "Drop it," like the floor itself might give way if anyone stepped harder. Then I circled the same word twice. Insurance. After that, I drove home. I locked the door behind me and leaned my forehead against it. The apartment hummed its small hum. The fridge clicked on. A neighbor's shower started up and then stopped. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed, then coughed, then laughed again. I carried the notebook to the kitchen and placed it beside the sink. I took out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Kelly. I stared at her name for a full minute, then I typed, "Can we talk tomorrow? In person?" She wrote back almost at once. "Yes." "Name the place." I told her a cafe near the river where the tables are close enough that everyone can hear you if you raise your voice, which means no one ever does. She sent a thumbs up and a small heart. I put the phone face down and turned off the lights. In the dark, I could feel the room around me more clearly. The couch, the table, the soft stack of laundry I had not yet folded, the outline of the guitar I was still learning to tune. I lay on the rug and pressed my cheek to the cool weave. I thought of a policy altered by a sick man, of a call from an agent, of a drawer that closed with a sound that tried to erase a question. I thought of my father and the way he taught me to check the oil in a car, and the way he always tied knots twice. I breathed in and out until the thoughts lined up and quieted, not gone, only waiting. Morning would come. There would be coffee and the river and a chair opposite Kelly and a conversation I could not yet see the shape of. For the first time since the door closed on my face, I felt the day move forward on its own. Not pushed, not dragged, not bribed, just moving, like water finds its way around a stone. Morning found me earlier than I expected. Light crept through the blinds, making stripes across the wall, and the smell of coffee from a neighbor's kitchen slipped through the crack under my door. I got dressed without turning on the lights and drove to the cafe by the river, the one I'd told Kelly about. The place was waking up slowly, metal chairs scraping concrete, a waitress setting out cups, the hum of the espresso machine. Kelly was already there, sitting by the window with her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked up when I came in and smiled in that small way people smile when they know too much. "You look tired," she said. "I am." We sat in the kind of silence that doesn't need fixing. When the waitress came, I ordered black coffee and toast just to have something to hold. "I heard some of what happened," she said after a while. "Your mom and Elara talk a lot when they think no one's listening. I'm sorry, Aubrielle, you didn't deserve that." I nodded. "They've always needed someone to blame or borrow from. I just stopped volunteering." She hesitated, then leaned forward. That word you texted me, insurance. What did you mean? I told her what I'd heard through the kitchen window, every line, every pause. She listened without interrupting, her fingers tapping the side of her cup. When I finished, she took a breath that sounded heavy. There's something you should know, she said. Uncle Charles, your dad, changed his life insurance beneficiary before he passed. It used to be you. Then, somehow, it was. My mother mentioned it once at Christmas. She said your stepfather handled the paperwork because your mom didn't want to bother you with details. The air between us thickened. You're sure? She nodded. I didn't think much of it back then, but the timing lines up with when he got sick. I stared at the table, at the ring of coffee drying on the wood. A sound escaped me, half laugh, half sigh. So that's what they were hiding. Kelly reached out but stopped short of touching my hand. If it helps, the policy wasn't small. He worked hard for that money. I shook my head. It doesn't help. It just explains everything. Outside the window, the river moved slow and heavy. Ducks drifted past a man throwing breadcrumbs. I felt the same strange calm I'd felt the night I cut the card in half, an exhaustion so deep it looped around into peace. They kept it from you, Kelly said softly. You could talk to a lawyer. I could, I said, but then I'd have to keep living inside their story. I'm done doing that. We sat there a while longer, the coffee cooling between us. Kelly told me about her job at the library, about the quiet she found among shelves and old paper. When we stood to leave, she hugged me quickly, the way people do when they mean it but don't want to make it harder. On the drive home, the sky was the color of steel. My phone vibrated twice, messages from Mom and Alara that I didn't read. At a red light, I opened the voice recorder and said quietly, Dad, I think I understand now. They were afraid of losing what wasn't theirs. Then I saved the file and locked the screen. Back in my apartment, I made tea and sat by the window. The city below moved on with its errands, its honking, its afternoon heat. I wrote in my notebook again, not about anger, but about space. I wrote, the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just stops you from looking for a door that was never meant for you. When evening came, I picked up my guitar. My fingers stumbled over the strings, clumsy and human, but the sound filled the room. I played until the sun sank behind the buildings, until my hands ached and the air smelled like rain. I didn't think of revenge, I didn't even think of justice. I thought of silence, the kind that grows after the last note fades and nothing is left but the heartbeat of the strings. That night, I slept without dreams. I chose a public place. Not a restaurant where a scene could become someone else's dinner story, not my apartment where the walls still remembered our last argument. I picked a community room at the branch library near the river. Fluorescent lights. Beige chairs. A clock that clicked loud enough to keep people honest. You can reserve it for free if you promise to clean up. I filled out the form online and wrote one sentence in the notes. Family discussion, no shouting. I sent a single message to Mom. One line, meet me at the library at 3. She replied after 15 minutes with a small okay. 10 minutes later, Alara sent a text from her number. Do we really need this? I did not answer. My stepfather wrote nothing at all. That felt true to who he was. He liked to be the last word without ever being the first voice. At 2:50, I set out 4 bottles of water and a stack of papers. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon cleaner. Through the window, I could see the river move in a slow brown sheet and the parking lot fill in small pulses. I sat in the chair closest to the door and placed my notebook on the table like a witness. They arrived together. Mom came in first, hair set, lipstick precise, a look on her face that said she wanted to be reasonable as long as reason agreed with her. Alara followed in a white blouse that made her look pure and important. My stepfather held the door with 2 fingers and let it thump shut behind him. Mom tried a smile. We could have done this at home. I shook my head. Here is fine. We sat. The clock clicked. The sound felt like a metronome for a song I did not want to sing but knew by heart. I pushed the water toward them. No one touched it. I started with what I could prove. I slid the first set of papers across the table. Utility statements, phone plan bills, streaming subscriptions, line after line, date after date. These are the payments I made for the house for 3 years, I said. This page shows the totals. This page shows the account numbers. This one shows the dates you used the credit card I provided for emergencies. Alara rolled her eyes and laughed under her breath. We know you helped. Why do you need to keep score? I looked at her and then back at the papers. I am not keeping score, I am documenting a pattern. My stepfather leaned back and folded his arms. Everyone was struggling. You were the one with a good job. That is what family does. It shares. Sharing is when everyone offers what they can, I said. This was not sharing. This was me paying so no one had to change. Mom's hands were clasped so tightly the knuckles shone white. "We never asked for this to be permanent. You never had to ask," I said. "It became permanent the day it became easy." The room went quiet except for the clock. I slid another document forward. "The car lease for Alara. My name on the line, that matters. Your missed payments flagged my credit," I said. "The lender called me. That stops now." I brought the transfer form. I set the paper in front of Alara and a pen beside it. "You have 30 days to move this into your name. If the bank declines, you sell the car." Her mouth dropped open. "You are being dramatic." "No," I said, "I am being specific." Mom's voice turned thin. "She needs a reliable car for work. You know how she gets when she is under pressure. She can take a bus or a ride share, or she can manage her deadlines like everyone else," I said. "I am done managing what does not belong to me." Alara shoved the form back. "I cannot qualify without a cosign. Be serious." I slid it back toward her. "I am being very serious. 30 days. My stepfather leaned forward. "You think you hold all the cards because you have money?" "No," I said, "I hold my own life, that is all." He looked like he wanted to laugh and did not know how. "You will regret this. When you need help, no one will be there. Then I will learn how to stand," I said. "That is a skill too." The clock clicked 3 times, a small hammer in a small world. I let the sound pass through the room so no one could call me hasty. Then I opened my notebook to a page I had marked. I read without looking up. "Food delivery for holidays you hosted, retreats, spa packages, electronics, flights. Not one of these was an emergency. Not one of these was discussed with me beforehand. You did not ask, you assumed, and you hid it inside the word family." Mom flinched at that. She looked at the door and then at me. "I admit some things were careless, but you know Alara has had a difficult time. She needs support." "We all need support," I said. "Support is not a blank check. Support is not a daughter who becomes a utility company with a face." Alara's hands were flat on the table now. Her voice sharpened. "So what is this then? You call us here to lecture us and wave papers like a little banker." I closed the notebook. "No, I called you here to end something. The automatic payments are canceled. The streaming logins are reset. The phone plan is no longer shared. The car transfer is due in 30 days. After that, there is nothing to discuss." For a second, I thought she might throw the water bottle. She gripped the cap until it crackled, then let it go. Her jaw worked through a set of words she decided not to say. Mom's eyes filled and cleared like glass catching light. "This is not how a family should be." I nodded. "You are right. A family should not be like this." The sentence hung there between us, heavy and simple. No one moved. Outside the window, a jogger passed with a dog that wanted to sniff everything and a leash that said no. My stepfather broke first. His voice dropped into the register he used when he wanted to make simple things feel large. "There is more you are not thinking about. Your father's choices. The way he set things up. You do not understand the whole picture." I kept my gaze steady. "Then explain it, all of it." He looked at Mom. Mom looked at her lap. Alara looked at the ceiling like it might give her lines to read. The clock clicked again. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, both hands open. 3 weeks ago, I heard something through the kitchen window, the word insurance. I heard you tell Alara to stop. I heard a drawer close. "If there is something about Dad's policy that concerns me, say it now. Otherwise, we will not mention it again." Alara smirked, but her eyes flashed. "You are fishing." I waited. No one spoke. I felt my pulse move from my neck into my wrists and then settle there like a quiet animal. Mom reached for a paper towel and folded it into a small square. Her voice went careful, the voice that used to soothe me when I had nightmares. "There were many documents when your father was sick. He did not want to burden you." I felt the floor tilt just slightly and then set back down. "What did he change?" I asked. "When, and who helped him?" My stepfather sighed, a long sound that pretended to be patience. "We are not doing this here." "Yes," I said. "Here is exactly where we are doing it, because here there is a clock and a table and no one can pretend this is a warm conversation over dessert." He stood as if to leave. I did not reach for him. I did not ask him to sit. I let his body make the choice it wanted to make. Mom touched his sleeve. "Stay," she whispered. Then she looked at me. I could see the calculation move behind her eyes like weather behind glass. "Your father adjusted some things late," she said. "That is all. The details are private." "Private is what people say when they mean hidden," I said. "I will not ask again. If there is something I should know, tell me. If not, we are done." The room felt smaller than when we had entered it. The air felt used. A child laughed in the hallway and the sound came through the door like a memory that had taken the wrong turn. Alara shifted in her chair, restless as a cat who had pushed a glass off the counter and was waiting to hear it break. She took the pen, spun it once, and set it down. Her voice came out sweet and bored. Dad made sure the right people were taken care of. That is what good men do. The words landed like a stone dropped in shallow water. No depth, just a splash, but they still wet everything. I stood. The chair legs stuttered against the tile. I gathered the stack of copies back into a neat pile and slid them into a folder. I left the car transfer on the table where Alara could not pretend to forget it. Then I took my notebook and closed it with a soft clap that sounded louder than it should have. "I am leaving now," I said. "You have your list. You have your choices. If you want to speak to me, speak with honesty. If you want to send apologies, send them to the person you were when you thought I would pay forever. She is the one who needs them." "I do not." Mom reached for me then, a small motion, fingers opening and closing on air. Her mouth shaped my name and did not finish it. My stepfather looked at the window as if it had wronged him. Alara picked up the transfer form and held it as if it might stain. I walked to the door and let the clock count my steps. 1, 2, 3. At the fourth click I opened it and the hallway air felt cooler than the room. As I stepped through, Alara called after me without looking up. "You will come back." "You always do." I turned my head enough that my voice could carry. "No," I said, "I always stayed. That is different." Then I left them with their water and their papers and their version, and I walked into the echoing brightness of the library where people were reading in chairs that had molded themselves to the shape of quiet. I passed a shelf of paperbacks and slid my hand along the spines without seeing the titles. The lights hummed in a key I could finally hear. Outside, the day had softened. The river moved like a thought you do not have to finish. I stood on the steps and let the sun touch my face. It felt like a permission slip signed by no one but me. I did not feel victorious. That word belongs to contests and crowns. I felt clear. That word belongs to water. I walked to my car. On the front seat, my notebook waited with the elastic band stretched around it like a belt that finally fit. I set both hands on the wheel and breathed once, twice, 3 times. Then I drove home at the speed of someone who has no more errands to run for anyone else. The drive home after the library meeting felt strangely quiet, as if even the traffic had decided to keep its distance. The city stretched out in front of me, full of other people's errands and arguments, their radios and grocery lists and small, unshattered lives. I kept the windows down. The wind pressed against my face and carried the faint scent of cut grass from a park I used to visit as a kid. Halfway across the bridge I slowed, pulled onto the shoulder, and killed the engine. The water below was flat and dark, holding the afternoon light like a secret. I rested my head on the steering wheel and counted my breaths until the shaking in my hands eased. I wasn't crying. The tears had already burned themselves out somewhere between the words private and insurance. What remained was a clean exhaustion, the kind that follows a storm. I took out my phone and scrolled to the voice memo I'd recorded for Dad. I pressed play. My own voice came through the speaker, low and tired. They were afraid of losing what wasn't theirs. Hearing it now, I realized I hadn't been talking to him at all. I'd been talking to myself. To the part of me that still needed his permission to let go. I looked at the folder on the passenger seat. The stack of documents, the proof, the neat math of betrayal, I didn't need it anymore. None of it could give back what had been taken. I rolled down the window and let the wind pull the top sheet free. It lifted, turned twice, and vanished over the water. The rest followed one by one until only my notebook was left, that I kept. It held the truth, and I wanted to remember, not for revenge but for context. At home, the apartment felt lighter. The shadows fell in new places. I opened all the windows and let the air move through the rooms, lifting the smell of paper and old coffee. The evening light turned the walls a deep gold. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the urge to clean. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and listened to the city outside, the distant sirens, a dog barking, a woman laughing somewhere down the block. When my phone buzzed, I ignored it. It buzzed again, a longer vibration. I picked it up. It was a message from Mom. "We need to talk about what your father wanted. You're misunderstanding everything." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I turned the phone over and let it rest on the carpet. I thought about what she'd said at the library. He didn't want to burden you. Maybe that had been true. Maybe he had changed the policy out of fear, not deceit. But if that was the case, why hide it? Why build an entire house of silence around one man's decision? The answer came slow but clear. Because silence is easier to maintain than guilt. Because when people start lying for love, they forget who they're protecting. I got up and made tea, the simple ritual steadying my hands. Steam rose in thin ribbons, catching the last of the light. I carried the cup to the window and watched the streetlights blink on. Somewhere out there, Mom and Alara were probably talking about me, rewriting the story so it fit their comfort. I let them. Let them have the version where I was ungrateful, dramatic, cold. I didn't need to be the hero of their story anymore. Later, as the city slipped toward night, I sat at the table and opened my notebook. I turned to a clean page and wrote, "I don't need closure from people who profit from the open wound." The words came easily, clean, and sure. I kept writing, not for evidence, not for memory, but because it felt like building something new out of the wreckage. Forgiveness is not returning to the scene of the crime. Family is not a debt that never ends. Truth is not kindness, but it's the only light that doesn't go out. I closed the notebook and set it beside the cold cup of tea. The room smelled like paper and rain. Outside, thunder rolled far away, soft, delayed, the sky clearing its throat before the next change. Before bed, I went to the mirror and studied the woman looking back. Her hair was messy, eyes rimmed red, a faint line on her cheek from where she'd leaned against the couch. But her shoulders were straight, her mouth calm. She didn't look like someone who had lost. She looked like someone who had finally stopped bargaining. I whispered into the glass, "This is where it starts." And in the quiet that followed, the apartment seemed to agree. The rain began in a quiet way, like the sky was testing the idea before it committed. I had left the windows cracked to let the apartment breathe, and now the room carried the smell of wet pavement and dust waking up. I made soup I did not finish and let the spoon rest in the bowl like a small boat. The day after, the library felt long and flat, a page with nothing written on it yet. When the knock came, it was not a knock. It was the light brush of paper against the door. I knew the sound because I used to slide notes under my mother's bedroom when I was 12 and bad at talking. I went to the peephole and saw no one, only the hallway stretching out with its evening light, the faded runner rug, the plant my neighbor kept forgetting to water. I opened the door and looked down. A white envelope waited at my feet. No postage, no return address, only my name written in the hand I could have recognized in a crowd a mile away. The E rose too tall, the L dipped like a little bow. I did not pick it up. I stood there with the door open and listened to the building's small heart. Someone boiling pasta, someone setting down a glass, a television laugh track 3 apartments away. The envelope looked like it had always belonged on that mat. It looked patient. I carried it to the table and sat, hands in my lap. For a long minute the letter existed the way a storm exists just before it breaks, the air strange and heavy. Then I slid a finger under the flap and opened it along the seam. I was careful not to tear the paper. I told myself it was because I was neat. I knew it was because I was afraid. The page inside was folded in thirds. Her handwriting ran across it in gentle loops and steady lines, neat and familiar and strange all at once. I read the first 2 words and stopped. My daughter. I had not seen those 2 together in her voice in a long time. It made something in my chest shift like furniture. I read, "My daughter, I do not know how to begin. I do not know if I deserve the chance to begin at all. I have done many things wrong. I have been small when I should have been large. I have kept peace when I should have kept you. If I say I am sorry, the words feel thin. But I am sorry." I sat back and stared at the wall, then leaned forward and kept going. "You have always been the one who stood straight. When your stepfather lost work, you stood. When I was tired, you stood. When your sister cried, you stood. I let you stand for all of us until you shook. I told myself you were strong, and I used your strength as if it were a bank. That is not mothering." The rain grew louder. It tapped on the sill and found the spots the paint had not covered well. About the things you heard. There were documents when your father got sick. There were choices. He was afraid. I was afraid. We told ourselves we were protecting you from details, but we were protecting ourselves from shame. I will not pretend I did not know that. I knew it as it was happening, and I chose the quiet because quiet was easy to feed. I do not ask you to forgive me for that. I ask you to believe that I loved you even when I did not choose you. I paused and pressed my thumb into the edge of the paper until a small crescent formed. I did not cry. The words pressed against me like a soft coat that no longer fit. There was a second sheet. I lifted it, and a small slip fell free, the way a feather drops from a wing you did not know was above you. I turned the slip over. It was not a feather. It was a photocopy of a cover page with a letterhead I recognized from the bank. The title at the top said Policy Information. I did not read more than that. I set it face down and returned to the letter. I would not jump ahead. I would not let the story take the pen out of my hand. I want to explain something about Alara. You will say I am making excuses. Maybe I am. She came to us when she was already good at kneading. I felt useful when I could calm her. I felt younger around her. I felt like a woman who could still be the center of a room. This is ugly to write, but it is true. With you, I never had to try. With her, I performed. You were home and she was applause, and I chose the sound over the shelter. That is my sin, not hers, mine. I stood and walked to the sink and ran water over my wrists until the cool reached the pulse. I dried my hands on a towel that smelled like lemon and leaned on the counter. When I sat again, the chair made a small complaint. I cannot turn back what has been signed. Some things are not mine to return. But I can stop pretending I did not see what I saw. I can say I knew you were the one carrying us. I can say I watched you do it and told myself it was love. It was not. It was hunger dressed as devotion. If you want the papers I have, they are yours to look at. If you want to never hear from me again, I will live with the sound of that silence. I hope one day you stand in a life that has nothing of us in it except the part of you that was always yours. When I picture you now, I picture you near water. I hope that is true. I hope you let the water keep what you do not want to carry. I hope you write. You used to write such beautiful things and then you stopped. I like to think you will write again and none of the words will be for me. Mothers want to be at the center. I will pray to be an edges woman if that is what lets you breathe. Your mother. The last 2 words were smaller than the rest. It was as if her hand had lowered its eyes. I sat a while without moving. The rain had settled into a steady pour now, the kind that makes the city smell new. I went to the window and watched people hurry with jackets pulled over their heads. A dog shook itself and looked irritated at the sky as if someone had forgotten to turn something off. Across the street, a child hopped over puddles that had not yet grown into each other. He landed with a splash and laughed. When I turned back to the table, the small photocopy waiting beneath the letter felt larger than the page above it. I picked it up. The paper was thin, the print slightly faded. Policy number, insured name, issue date, revision date. I looked at the 2 dates until my eyes stung. The revision had been made in the last month of my father's life. The type beneath that line listed beneficiary. A name followed. It was not mine. I set the paper down without reading the rest. Not because I did not understand it. Because I did, and understanding has a way of closing a door with a quiet latch. The kettle clicked off from where I had forgotten it was warming the water again. I poured and watched the steam lift in soft white. My hand shook only once. I steadied it against the counter and breathed until the room had edges again. I carried the cup to the window and stood there, not sipping, just feeling the warmth against my fingers. A small part of me wanted to call, to ask for the pages that would follow this cover sheet, to demand an origin story for a signature that had erased me from a ledger I did not know existed. Another part of me, the part that had driven to the lake and written sentences in a notebook and learned the first clumsy chords of a song, knew that I could choose a different verb. I could refuse. The phone buzzed on the table. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and I flipped it over to see the screen. Kelly's name. Are you okay? I wrote back, I am reading. She answered with a single heart. No questions, no advice. A witness without a camera. The rain slowed to a fine mist. The hallway outside my apartment echoed with the soft drag of the building's heavy front door, the catch and close that always followed a delivery. I thought of the boy with the cupcakes at the gas station, how his mouth had opened in surprise at a small sweetness. I thought of the envelope at my feet, the grown woman version of sliding notes under a bedroom door. I set the letter back into its envelope and placed it on the bookshelf between 2 old paperbacks I had kept since college, not because I wanted to save it, because I needed to put it somewhere that was not a shrine and not a trash can, somewhere as unimportant as it deserved to be. I turned off the kitchen light, and the apartment softened into gray. My guitar leaned where the wall met the bookcase. I picked it up, tuned a string that had slipped, and laid my fingers in the shape I had been practicing. The chord rang out rough and honest. It was not pretty yet. It was mine. I played until the rain stopped and the first thin blue of evening pooled on the floor. The letter stayed on the shelf and did not rise to follow me. The photocopy stayed under it like a shadow that could not leave its object. My hands learned the shape again and again until the notes formed a curve my body could trust. When my fingers tired, I closed my eyes and let the last vibrations fade into the quiet. My chest felt sore but open, like a room after you move the furniture to where it was always supposed to go. I whispered to the empty apartment, to the woman who had written, and to the one she had decided not to be anymore. Thank you for the truth. I will not live inside it. The clock on the stove clicked over to a new hour. In the small blue digits, I saw my name without their house wrapped around it. I let that vision stay until it warmed, then went to wash my hands, as if I could rinse off the habit of reaching back. Outside, the world smelled like wet concrete and the beginning of something. The next morning, the air held that after-rain brightness, everything rinsed clean but still damp at the edges. I made coffee and sat with the cup cooling between my palms. The letter was still on the shelf where I'd left it. A streak of light hit the envelope so that the paper glowed through at the folds. I watched it for a while before I moved. I took it down and read the first page again, slower this time. Without the shock, the words felt smaller, almost ordinary. They did not change the past, they only labeled it. The apology was a photograph of regret, not the act itself. I folded the pages back along their creases and slipped them into the envelope again. I could live with knowing. I did not need to hold it. When I opened my laptop, an email notification blinked, a message from a law office in Houston. The subject line said Beneficiary Confirmation, Policy 24183. My chest tightened. I hadn't contacted anyone. The message was short. Ms. Figueroa, your mother provided your contact information to forward a copy of your late father's insurance documentation. Please confirm receipt. Below it was a scanned attachment. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I closed the laptop instead. I stood at the window and watched a group of cyclists pass on the street, their bright jackets moving like a single creature. They didn't look back. The world had kept turning, indifferent and faithful. After a while, I opened the laptop again and clicked the file. The scanned pages appeared in gray-white tones, policy language, signatures, official stamps. At the bottom of the third page, I found the clause I didn't want to see but already knew existed: primary beneficiary, Alara Figueroa. Contingent beneficiary, Alara Figueroa, trust held by Alara Figueroa. I scrolled to the last page. My father's signature was there, shaky and faint, dated 6 days before he died. Beside it, in neat black ink, the witness signature, Marjorie Figueroa, my mother. The cursor blinked at the edge of the screen like a pulse. I took a slow breath and let it out through my teeth. There was no betrayal left to uncover, only arithmetic. He had signed, she had watched, and I had paid for the light bills of the people who had already written me out. I printed the first page, not as evidence, but as a line I could draw under the story. I folded it and slipped it into my notebook behind the page where I had written, I will not pay to be loved. Then I wrote something new beneath it. I will not live like a ledger. The sound of the pen on paper steadied me. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning, not scrubbing or sorting, just moving things, touching everything that was mine. I threw away the chipped mug with the family photo printed on it. I replaced the blanket on the couch with one I had bought years ago and never used because it was too nice. I lit a candle that smelled of cedar and rain. Around noon, the sun came out fully. The light through the window turned gold against the walls. I set up my small speaker and let music fill the apartment, slow guitar, the kind of melody that stays below conversation. My phone buzzed once more. Another message from Mom, please, can we talk in person? I'll bring the documents. You'll understand if you just listen. I stared at the screen, thumb on the reply field, but the words didn't come. There was nothing new to understand. I typed 2 letters no and deleted them. Then I turned off notifications entirely. Instead, I packed a small bag, my notebook, a change of clothes, my father's old lighter that no longer worked but felt like him. I drove out of the city with no destination, just a direction, the same road that curved past the lake. The sky above it was endless, the color of clean linen. When I reached the water, I parked and walked to the edge. The surface shimmered like it remembered the last time I had stood there. I took the printed page from my notebook and held it for a moment. The text blurred in the bright light. Then I tore it into pieces and dropped them one by one into the lake. Each fragment spread out and sank until there was nothing but ripples. I whispered, "You can keep it." The wind picked up, soft and cool, brushing my hair across my face. I stayed there until the sun leaned low and the air smelled of clay and moss. I didn't think of forgiveness. I didn't think of anger. I thought of space, how it grows where you stop trying to fill it. When I finally drove home, the city lights came on one by one like a slow exhale. The apartment waited, quiet and whole. The envelope on the shelf still stood between the paperbacks, but now it looked smaller, just another piece of paper living its small, finished life. I sat down at the table and opened my notebook to a blank page. Tomorrow, I wrote, I will begin again, not as someone's daughter, but as someone's self. I closed the book and left it open to dry in the air, the ink shining faintly like the promise of another kind of story. Morning arrived with a soft insistence, as if the light had been waiting outside the whole night and finally decided to come in without asking. I made coffee and drank it standing at the window. The street below looked ordinary in a way that felt merciful. A man jogged with a dog that refused to keep the same pace. A delivery truck blocked a lane, and no one honked. The city did what cities do. It continued. I opened drawers, not to sort evidence but to touch my life. I stacked the bills that belonged only to me. I threw away the envelopes that still carried their house as a return address. I changed the last of the passwords I had forgotten about, the small ghosts that keep logging you into rooms you no longer want to visit. The screen asked, "Are you sure?" and I clicked yes, and the quiet that followed was not empty. It was a freshly swept floor. Instead of music, I let the apartment hum. The fridge clicked on. The pipes answered somewhere inside the wall. A neighbor's blender groaned and stopped. It felt like a chorus of practical things reminding me that a life is mostly what you do between the scenes. By noon, I needed air, so I took my camera and walked toward the river. I had signed up for a beginner class a week before everything cracked open and then forgot to attend. The next session met under the big sycamore near the pedestrian bridge. A circle of folding chairs, a white-haired woman with a clipboard, 6 students dressed in versions of comfortable. I hovered at the edge until the woman looked up and lifted a hand. "You must be Aubrielle," she said. I nodded. "Sorry for missing the first week." "You came today," she said. "That is the important part. Sit. We are learning to watch." We practiced with simple exercises, lines and shadows, water and how it pretends to be still, faces when people think no one is looking. The instructor asked us to pick one thing and follow it with our eyes for 10 minutes without taking a picture. I chose a leaf turning slow circles in a patch of backwater. It was not beautiful, not tragic, not important. By the end of the 10 minutes, I felt like I knew that leaf better than I knew some relatives. When we finished, a woman about my age with a denim jacket lingered beside me. She had a cautious warmth in her face, the kind that waits to see if it is welcome. "First class?" she asked. "First I have shown up for," I said. "I am Nora," she said. "I chose a traffic cone and it changed my life." I laughed before I could stop myself. "How?" "It did not move," she said, "so I had to." We walked with the group toward the bridge and then drifted away. She told me about her job at a plant nursery where every plant has a personality and most of them are needy. I told her I was between stories. She nodded like that was a real career. We exchanged numbers because sometimes you do not have to pretend you will, and sometimes you do not have to pretend you will not. On the way home, I stopped at a grocery store I rarely visited. I bought a small loaf of bread that cost more than bread should, and a jar of jam made by someone who put their face on the label. I carried the bag like a promise. Back in the apartment, I sliced the bread and ate it with my fingers, standing at the counter, jam sweet enough to make me close my eyes. It felt like permission disguised as lunch. My phone lit up on the table. A message from Kelly. No questions, just a picture of the river with the caption "Good light today." I sent her the photo of the leaf and she sent back 3 heart emojis and the words "I knew you would see it." The thread of our exchange was thin and steady. A line someone throws for you not to pull you in, but to remind you there is a shore. In the afternoon, I cleaned without scrubbing. I moved the couch so that it faced the window, not the television. I placed my father's broken lighter on the bookcase beside a small clay bowl I had made in a class years ago and kept inside a drawer because it was crooked. Crooked seemed honest now. I hung one of my photographs for the first time, a picture I had taken of the lake on the day I could finally breathe. The water in the print looked like a note held past its measure. Toward evening, I sat on the floor with the guitar across my lap. My fingers found the chord I had been practicing and then another and another. The change between them was still clumsy, a small skip like a record with a scratch, but the sound filled the room and turned the corners soft. Between chords, I breathed the way the instructor had asked us to breathe when the shutter stayed still. In and out without trying to teach the air anything. When the phone buzzed, I let it. When it buzzed again, I turned it over. A number I did not have saved. The message was short. "I left something for you, front door." I did not move immediately. I watched the words until they went flat and harmless, then stood and walked down the hall. The building smelled like warm paint and detergent. At my door, a small brown box waited, tied with kitchen string. There was no note, only my name written carefully in a hand that tried not to be recognized. I carried it to the table and sat. The knot was tight. For a second, I almost reached for scissors, but instead I picked at it until it gave. Inside lay a stack of photographs and a ring of keys on a metal loop. The top photo was a Polaroid of a picnic at the park near our old house. My mother looked younger than I remembered she could look. My father had his head tipped back, laughing. I was small and solemn, holding a plastic cup like it was important. On the back of the photo, someone had written Year of the Comets in my mother's slanted script. Beneath it, a photo of a birthday I do not remember. I am wearing a paper crown that slides down over one eyebrow. My father is guiding my hand toward candles. The note on the back read, "Make a wish you do not have to earn." I went through them slowly. Unposed moments, a life that had existed before the ledger. The keys at the bottom of the box were labeled in the same careful script. Storage, locker, attic. That last one made my throat tight. The house had no attic when I lived there. They must have added a pull down after I left. I did not want the keys. That was the first clean thought. I did not want to climb a ladder into a space full of things that had learned to live without me. I put the ring back in the box and closed the lid. The urge to call and say, "Take this back," rose and faded like a small wave that meets a stone. Instead, I took out one photograph and pinned it to the corkboard beside my desk, not as an altar, as a record. This happened. We were a person and a smaller person once, in a park with cheap cups and sunlight on our shoulders. The sky dimmed. A storm moved in from the west without drama, a gray sheet across the horizon. I stood at the window and watched it come. I thought of the policy pages and the signature that shook. I thought of my mother writing "Edge's woman" and how some prayers are just wishes that have learned grammar. I did not feel cruel. I did not feel tender. I felt like a door standing open to my own apartment. I cooked something simple and ate it at the table with the guitar leaning against the empty chair opposite me like a guest who knows when to keep quiet. After dinner, I washed the dish and left it to dry. I wiped the counter as if I were patting a shoulder. Thank you for today. Before bed, I opened the notebook. The page where I had written "Tomorrow I will begin again" looked back with a calm I had not felt when I wrote it. Below it, I added a line. Beginning again is a series of small endings done on purpose. I closed the book. The apartment darkened in layers. I lay down and listened to the building settle. Somewhere a pipe sighed. Somewhere a door closed. Somewhere a neighbor laughed at the end of a show. The laugh cut off, and the quiet that followed belonged to all of us. Just before sleep reached me, there was one last sound, the soft ping of an email arriving. I did not check it. I had already decided that tonight would have no more letters. I let sleep take me like water takes a stone that finally stops pretending it is not meant to sink a little before it finds where it rests. The email could have waited until morning, but it didn't. I woke before sunrise with that restless kind of clarity that only comes when something inside you has already decided. The sky outside was a thin gray, and the city below still half asleep. I made coffee and sat on the floor beside the open window, knees drawn to my chest, notebook beside me. The box with the photos and keys still sat on the table where I'd left it. The string that had held it shut was coiled beside it like a small question mark. I touched the lid but didn't open it. The decision I'd been circling around for days was finally complete, quiet and definite. At 7, I dressed simply, jeans, a soft gray shirt, no makeup. I slid the box into a tote bag, slung it over my shoulder, and left. The air outside was cool, the smell of morning bread floating from the bakery down the block. I drove without music, letting the sound of the tires and the occasional flutter of birds fill the car. The highway curved east toward the old neighborhood. The last time I had driven that way, the backseat had been full of gift bags and things I thought would fix us. Now there was only the sound of breath and a heartbeat I could finally recognize as mine. The house looked smaller than memory. The paint had been redone, brighter, too clean. The yard was the same though, overgrown at the corners, the rose bush near the fence still stubbornly alive. I parked across the street and sat for a minute. A car wasn't in the driveway, no movement behind the curtains. The quiet felt like permission. I took the box from the bag and walked to the front porch. The steps creaked the same way they always had. I set the box down near the door, centered between the welcome mat and the threshold. I didn't knock. I didn't even touch the doorknob. I just stood there long enough to notice the smell of wet earth and wood. For a heartbeat, I thought of sliding a note under the door, something final, something poetic, the kind of thing that would make sense later. But there was nothing to explain. They had their papers and I had the silence. That was the exchange. When I turned to go, I caught my reflection in the window beside the door, a woman standing straight, no longer waiting to be invited inside. I walked back to the car and drove to the lake instead. The water looked new every time, even though it was. Mist hovered just above the surface, thin as silk. The same park bench waited at the curve of the path. I sat there, the wood damp against my legs, and watched the light pull itself slowly out of the horizon. I took out my notebook. On the first blank page I wrote, "Today I returned what wasn't mine to keep. Today I became lighter by the weight of a box. Today I forgave the version of me who thought love was a currency." Then I closed it and set it beside me. A jogger passed, nodding hello. A child's laughter echoed from somewhere down the trail. The world was awake again. I untied my shoes and stepped barefoot onto the cold grass. The ground was wet, soft, forgiving. I walked down to the water's edge. The surface rippled slightly where the wind brushed it. I knelt, touched the water, and let it cool my fingers. "This is all I wanted," I whispered. "To not carry them anymore." The wind carried my words away, scattering them like seeds. I stayed until the sun was fully up, until the mist burned off and the lake turned to gold. Then I stood, brushed the dirt from my palms, and smiled, not for anyone watching, but for the quiet proof that I was still here. On the drive back, I passed a row of shops I hadn't noticed before: a used bookstore, a plant shop, a cafe with hand-painted letters on the window, "We roast our own hope." The phrase made me laugh out loud, an easy sound that startled me with how natural it felt. I parked without thinking. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and citrus and possibility. The barista smiled, the kind of genuine smile that doesn't expect one in return. I ordered an Americano and a muffin, took a seat by the window, and opened my notebook again. This time, I didn't write about endings. I wrote about beginnings, the small, ordinary kind. Learn names of trees. Walk without music sometimes. Say yes to people who make space, not noise. Be kind to the woman you're becoming. By the time the cup was empty, the page was full. The ink glistened faintly in the sunlight. I tore the page free, folded it neatly, and slipped it into the back of my wallet. Not as a vow, but as a map I could touch when I forgot which direction freedom faces. As I stepped outside, the air was warm. The city's sound returned, not heavy, just present. The day had begun again, and so had I. The horizon arrived quietly, the way all real endings do, without a drum roll, without applause. It came one morning when I realized that I no longer woke up rehearsing conversations that would never happen. My mind didn't rush to defend itself before the day even began. It simply opened its eyes. The light in my apartment was soft and diffused, touching the walls like it was checking to see if I was awake. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to the hum of the city waking beneath me, a bus engine, the squeak of brakes, a door shutting somewhere down the hall. For the first time in months, none of it felt like background noise to a story about loss. It was just life, steady and unremarkable, and that was the miracle. I made breakfast. Real breakfast. Eggs, toast, orange slices. I ate slowly, sitting by the window with my legs tucked under me. I watched the people down on the street, an older man watering plants on his balcony, a woman walking her dog, a group of kids on bikes. They all had their own stories spinning behind those small motions, and I was no longer orbiting anyone else's. The camera from my photography class sat on the counter, waiting. I picked it up and went outside. The air smelled faintly of sun-warmed metal and lavender from someone's window box. I walked without a destination, taking pictures of ordinary things, reflections in puddles, the shadow of a street lamp bending over the sidewalk, a paper bag caught in the wind. I started to notice how light slid around corners, how the day had moods of its own. When I reached the river, the same one that had carried so many of my tears and small rituals, I found Nora sitting on the bench with a coffee in one hand and her camera in the other. She waved. "Hey, look who remembered her camera this time," she said. "I'm trying to be consistent," I smiled. She laughed. "Consistency is overrated, you just have to show up." We spent the next hour wandering along the riverbank, taking photos and trading small stories. Nothing heavy, just what music we'd been listening to, which street vendor made the best coffee, the shape of clouds that looked like continents. She had a way of talking that made time unimportant. At one point, she aimed her camera at me. "Don't move," she said. I froze, half laughing. "I'm terrible at this." "Good," she said. "Perfect moments aren't the point." The shutter clicked. A simple sound, but it felt like a seal breaking on a new part of my life. We walked back together. At the corner where we would part, she looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." I shrugged. "Maybe I am." "Keep it that way," she said. "Don't let anyone rent space in your ribs for free." Her words stayed with me all the way home. That evening, I printed a few of the photos from the day. Not the perfect ones, just the honest ones. One of them was the picture Nora had taken of me, blurry at the edges, hair caught by the wind, eyes half closed from laughing. I pinned it on the wall beside the lake photo. For the first time, the woman in the frame didn't look like someone trying to hold her life together. She looked like someone who had finally stopped gripping it so hard. I turned off the lights and sat by the window. The sky was melting from pink to gray. The city lights blinked on one by one, small and patient. I thought of my father then, but not in anger, more like gratitude. The lessons he gave me weren't in his words, they were in the quiet way he moved through the world, fixing what he could, forgiving what he couldn't. Maybe I had finally learned that. I whispered into the dusk, "I made it, Dad." The wind outside shifted, rattling the window frame just enough to answer. Later, I opened my notebook, the same one that had carried every word, every truth, every small confession, and turned to the very last page. I didn't know what to write at first. Then I wrote, I thought this story was about losing them. It was never that. It was about finding the edges of myself and learning I was whole all along. I closed the notebook gently and placed it beside the guitar. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, low and harmless, the kind that comes after heat. The rain began again, steady, familiar. I opened the window wide and let it in. The drops hit the sill, the floor, my skin. The air smelled like metal and beginnings. I whispered, I'm not afraid of storms anymore. And for once, it was true. The rain lasted through the night, soft and constant, like a hand smoothing the wrinkles out of everything that had come before. I left the window open and fell asleep to the sound of it, the city breathing in rhythm with the storm. When I woke, sunlight had already found its way through the curtains. The air was cool and clear, and every surface gleamed a little. It felt like waking inside a clean slate. I brewed coffee, opened the windows wider, and let the day walk right in. There were no unread messages, no reminders, no ghosts waiting for acknowledgement. Just the small sounds of the world working properly, pipes, footsteps upstairs, the hum of the fridge. Peace was not loud. It was an accumulation of things that no longer hurt. I took my camera and walked again, this time toward the hills at the edge of the city. The streets thinned into quiet neighborhoods and then into open fields. The horizon stretched wide, unbroken. Clouds drifted slow and confident across the blue, and for the first time in years, I wasn't rushing toward or away from anything. I was simply moving through it. At the crest of the hill, I stopped and turned around. The city shimmered below, small and forgiving. I lifted the camera, framed the skyline against the line of sky, and clicked the shutter. The sound was soft, almost like breathing. I sat in the grass and let the wind play with my hair. In that moment, I thought of all the versions of myself that had carried me here, the girl waiting at the door with a cake melting in her hands, the woman canceling payments one by one, the daughter listening through a kitchen window, the soul at the lake whispering no more. Each of them had done their best with what they knew. I closed my eyes and said quietly, "Thank you." When I opened them, the light had shifted, a bright band spilling across the field, reaching all the way to my shoes. The air smelled of wild mint and wet earth. I raised the camera again, not to capture it, but to honor it. Some moments belong to memory, not proof. As I walked back down, I passed a family picnicking under a large oak. The mother was slicing fruit, while a little boy chased a kite that refused to stay in the air. His laughter came in bursts, frustrated and joyful all at once. The kite dove and rose again. I smiled because that's what hope looks like, persistence without certainty. When I reached my car, I saw my reflection in the window. No makeup, no pretense, wind in my hair, a smear of dirt on my cheek. I didn't fix it. I liked how it looked. Alive. Back home, I printed the horizon photo and pinned it above my desk. The line where sky met earth ran straight through the frame, dividing it perfectly, reminding me that balance is not stillness. Its motion held just long enough to understand it. I sat at the table with my notebook, the last blank page. The apartment smelled of rain and coffee and something faintly new. I wrote slowly, letting each word find its weight. I used to think freedom was loud, that it had to roar or arrive with celebration. But it is. Freedom is quiet. It's when you can stand in your own home, hear nothing but your breath, and know it's enough. The horizon isn't where things end. It's where the world begins again, unseen but waiting. I closed the notebook for the last time. The cover had softened from use, the corners curled, the spine creased like a palm line. I traced my name on it with one finger, smiling. Then I placed it on the shelf beside the photograph of the lake, the day the door finally closed, and the day I finally opened one. Outside, the rain began again, gentler now, as if reminding me that endings and beginnings often sound the same. I turned off the lights, left the window open, and let the world come in.